Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Spannerman again here with another video. Hope you enjoyed the video today. Please subscribe to the channel. Any comments, thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Spannerman again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about chainsaw teeth. Can they be different lengths, and if so, what are the problems associated with chainsaws cutting crooked, and why does it happen, and what can we do to eliminate it? But first of all, I just like to say that these videos are for the beginner. Now, being a beginner, you may get on YouTube or search the internet to try and find out what's the best way to file a chain. And you'll come across quite a lot of videos that will sort of sound a little bit like this. What they'll tell you to do is find your worst tooth, meaning that the worst tooth may be chipped or damaged. Mark it, file every tooth the same length, then on the right side, file every tooth the same length. You'll even get people that'll get digital verniers and say, oh, this tooth is 8.5 millimeters, this tooth is 8.55, and they'll file it a little bit more. They'll be there for 1 hour doing a chain using a digital vernier. And I just look at that and just crack up laughing, because they took that video literally, or that information saying that the left and the right have to be the same length and the rakers have to be the same height. So from a geometry and a mechanical and a point of view, I agree 100% that what they're saying is true, but it doesn't mean that it's practical. So you've got to look at everything from a practical point of view and also look at alternatives. Is there a different way? But what I would say, and I've done it before, is write startup instructions. You have to make it idiot proof, because people just stuff up. People just, no matter what you tell them, sometimes just do things wrong. So if you tell them that the left tooth and the right tooth have to be even and the depth gauges have to be even, the saw will cut straight. So I would probably tell people the same thing, especially beginners. But when you're more advanced and you've been doing it for a number of years, there is a different way, and that's what I'm going to show you. And one analogy that I can sort of use is a bit like your mouth. If I open my mouth slightly and take a little bit of chocolate cake and go, oh, that's beautiful, then I open my mouth and take a large bite of chocolate cake. But if I had something that limited my mouth, that took exactly the same amount that I could open my mouth, then I would be limited on my bite size. And this is what the raker gauge does. The raker limits the amount of bite. So we'll get to that and create a couple of scenarios. So the first scenario would be this. If we went out chainsawing and we came back and we filed the left side and the right side exactly the same length, and we filed the depth gauges the same length, the result would be that that saw would cut straight. That's one scenario. Another scenario is we go out, we file the left side, but the right side is different lengths. And we find out that the saw might cut slightly crooked. Now, let's exclude the bar, because we're not talking about anything that's bar related. This is purely tooth related. So why having different size length teeth will make the saw cut crooked? Because it's like your mouth, when I explained it before. If your mouth can open wider, it'll take a larger bite. So you've got to limit the amount of bite that a chainsaw tooth can bite into, and that's by the depth gauge, or the raker gauge as it's called. So how do people stuff up? Well, quite simply, if you look at a tooth, it's on a slant, it's on a slope. So as you progressively file this backwards, you need to progressively file this downwards. If you don't check this enough, then you find out that this tooth is longer than the next tooth behind it. Then you can find out that there's more forces on one side of your chain causing it to cut crooked. An example would be that if all the teeth were 2 millimeter shorter on the left side and you didn't check your rakers, the right side would be biting in harder and it would cut crooked. Guaranteed it will cut crooked. So if everything is uniform, meaning that the left teeth are exactly the same length as the right teeth, it will cut straight. But there is another way. Now, the other way is this, that you don't even worry about counting file strokes. You don't worry about measuring the teeth and getting a digital vernier. You sharpen the teeth until you look at each individual tooth. You sharpen that individual tooth as required. When you finish the left side, you go to the right side, you do exactly the same thing. You just file till it's sharp. When you've filed the left and the right, then you need to get your depth gauge. And the best depth gauge it could use is not this one. The best depth gauge you could use is a progressive depth gauge like this. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So what the depth gauge is going to do is make sure that irrespective of the length of the tooth, long as that height, that relationship between the height of here and the height of here is the same. So in other words, let's just say that a brand new chain has got 0.65 of a millimetre difference between the height, between here and here, 0.65 of a mil. And if we check at this part here, just say the tooth has been filed down and around about half the life, and we've still got 0.65 of a millimetre, and we've still got 0.65 of a millimetre. If we keep that 0.65 of a millimetre all the way through on each tooth, irrespective of the length of it, it will limit the bite size exactly the same. If the bite size is uniform, not the length of the tooth can be different. We're talking about the bite size. If the bite size is uniform, left and right, and that's determined by how much we file the depth gauges, then that chain will cut perfectly straight. You've just got to try and get your head around it a little bit. If the left side is shorter than the right side, then the raker or the depth gauges have to be adjusted accordingly, because it's the depth gauges that limit how much the tooth can bite in the timber. So if you've got them set incorrect, then the teeth will cut at different rates. And that's what needs to be uniform. That height difference that the tooth bites into, irrespective whether it's a millimetre shorter or a millimetre longer. That is not going to make the chain cut crooked if you limit that depth being the same. So we'll just sort of recap over that again. You've got two scenarios. If the left side and the right side are exactly the same length and the rakers are cut at the same length or filed at the right length, yes, it'll cut dead straight. If the left side is shorter than the right side and you do not file the rakers accordingly, each individual tooth, it'll cut crooked. But if the left side teeth are shorter than the right side, but you took the time to use your progressive depth gauge and filed each individual tooth on the left and each individual tooth on the right, irrespective that the length is different, it'll cut dead straight. Guaranteed. Now, there's a guy over in America called Buck and Billy Ray, and this guy's just an absolute legend, and he actually demonstrates where he has all the teeth different lengths, and he gets his Husqvarna depth gauge and he files the depth gauges all accordingly, goes out in the backyard and slices about 3-4 bits of timber, cuts perfectly dead straight. And like I said, it's a bit like your mouth. If your mouth could only open a certain amount and it could take only a certain amount of bite, then that bite would be uniform. But because your mouth can open wider or smaller, then the bite can be different. And that's the same thing that can happen on a chainsaw. If you file or grind your teeth without checking the rakers, then the bite size of the tooth can be different between each tooth and different between the left and the right. That imbalance between the left and the right, depends which side dominates, can make the difference between cutting to the left or cutting to the right. So to correct all of that, it's not the teeth that need to be the same length, it's the bite size of the raker. The height is in uniform, being the same height. Now, the best gauge to use is not this constant depth gauge, which only measures 0.65 of a millimetre, which was invented in the 50s by Joseph Cox in Portland, Oregon, and put a worldwide patent on it. And they're still selling this type of gauge today. Anyway, if we sort of go around about the mid-60s, a guy called by Ray Carlton, and I'm sure a lot of people out there have heard of Carlton Chain, invented the progressive depth gauge. The progressive depth gauge worked a little bit different than the constant depth gauge. The constant depth gauge would only ever remove 0.65 of a millimetre, but sat over 4 teeth. So if it didn't sit perfectly level, then you had inaccuracies there as well. So when Ray Carlton invented the Philo plate, which looked a little bit little bit like this, but a little bit different, he put a worldwide patent on it, and the whole idea how this works, it sits over each individual tooth. And when it sits over each individual tooth, it sets the height based on the length of the tooth. So it's a little bit different. What you've got to realise, and you may not realise it, that a tooth, as it travels along, kicks up and down like this. It's this rocking motion. So it has this rocking motion as it travels along. And as it hits timber, it kicks back until it hits the depth gauge. And then it's taken a bite out. And as it's being pulled along, it straightens back up, and the tooth behind it digs in, and it just keeps doing that. Each tooth keeps biting in and going straight up and down, and you end up with this rocking motion. And that's the cycle. And you must set the correct depth. So why is it, if you want to go back, if I was to teach a beginner from the very beginning, I would teach them the way that Still, Oregon, and all the others turn around and tell you, find your worst tooth, have them uniform, and the rakers. This is the ideal situation, and I agree with that in principle. But as I said, it's not the most practical. And it's only when you've got a lot of experience under your belt that you can turn around and say, well, hang on, wait a minute, what are we talking about here? Why do they have to be the same length? Because it will cut crooked. Yeah, but cutting's crooked because one tooth has taken more of a bite than the other. If I can limit the amount of bite on every tooth so it's all taking the same amount of bite, that means that each tooth, when it takes the same bite, there should be no reason for it to cut crooked. And yes, that's correct. It won't cut crooked under that situation if each tooth is taking the same amount of bite, irrespective of its length. It will cut straight, provided you took the time and effort to use your progressive depth gauge and set each individual tooth. And that's it. If you neglect to check each individual tooth and it cuts crooked, well, you got yourself to blame for that one. So it comes down, it's a maintenance issue, and it's up to you as to which way you want to do it. Look, I make these videos for the beginner. I know that a lot of people enjoy them. I get some great feedback. I love the comments. And just look, if there's something you're not too familiar with, if I've said something wrong, like sometimes I'm not reading off a script. It's all coming out, and sometimes I might say something slightly wrong, or I've got something wrong and I've got to redo the video again and go, oh God, I said that wrong. Sometimes I may not have checked the video and something slips through and I may have said something. Look, just give us a comment there and I'll put you on the right track. Thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Bye for now.